April 7th, 1942. Guadalcanal's moonless night stirs with distant gunfire, but hidden among the islands, an even darker war begins. The tiny PT boats, the US Navy's fastest and most daring naval experiment, slip out from shore. In the murky waters of the Pacific, they become nightmares for Japanese supply lines, racing off at 40 knots in wooden hulls, armed with torpedoes, machine guns, even depth charges. These weren't battleships. These were mosquitoes, zipping in, striking hard, and vanishing. The standard PT boat was some 78 to 80 feet long, about 20 feet across, displacing 43 to 56 tons depending on its load, and powered by 3 Packard V12 gasoline engines that pushed it to deadly speeds. Each vessel carried 4 21-inch Mark 8 torpedoes with warheads of nearly 466 pounds of TNT, twin .5 zero-caliber Browning machine guns, and sometimes extra 20mm or 37mm cannon upgrades. But speed and firepower didn't guarantee safety. These wooden marvels were vulnerable to shell splinters, radar detection, mechanical failures, and hostile fire. In the Solomon Islands and the slot, PT crews learned to be ghosts, cut the engines before entering enemy zones, glide in silent darkness, drop their payloads, then gun it and disappear before the enemy even knew they'd arrived. Their missions were often solo or in pairs, targeting barges, troop transports, fuel tankers, and supply convoys critical to sustaining island garrisons. Many boats were lost. Storms, reefs, friendly fire, enemy destroyers. Yet the PT men pressed on. Their fame would be built not from sinking giant warships, but from disrupting small craft and churning up logistical nightmares for the Japanese. These missions shaped the relentless island campaign in the Pacific, proving that in the dark, speed and surprise were as lethal as armor and size. And tonight, we dive deep into the whir of props, the tension of navigation by dead reckoning, and the stories of young crews whose lives were defined by seconds, the seconds between silence and thunder in the dark sea air. August 8th, 1943. The night air around Kolombangara was thick with humidity and fear. The PT boats had been ordered to intercept Japanese destroyers moving supplies under the cover of darkness. They called these runs Tokyo Express, and every Allied unit in the Solomons dreaded them. But tonight, the hunters became the hunted. PT-109, commanded by a young lieutenant named John F. Kennedy, idled in the black water, engines silent, eyes scanning the horizon. Suddenly, a massive shape loomed out of the dark. The Japanese destroyer Amagiri, running fast, slicing through the night like a steel shark. Kennedy barely had time to react before the destroyer rammed his small boat in half. The explosion threw men into burning oil and debris. 2 crewmen were killed instantly. Kennedy, his back injured, swam through darkness towing a wounded man with a life jacket strap clenched in his teeth. For hours, they fought the current until they reached a small island. That night, PT warfare earned its mythology: valor, chaos, and survival against impossible odds. But this was no isolated story. Across the Pacific, PT flotillas were striking every night, in New Guinea, the Philippines, and the Bismarck Sea, a constant blur of missions against convoys and barges. In 1 week, the boats of Squadron 9 fired over 100 torpedoes, claiming multiple cargo ships and troop barges sunk. Their impact went far beyond tonnage. Every supply route disrupted meant fewer Japanese reinforcements, fewer shells reaching the front, fewer days the enemy could hold an island. These were small boats making strategic dents in a massive war machine. Yet, For every victory came loss. The wooden hulls burned easily, and when a boat was hit, the fire was merciless. Crews jumped into flaming fuel slicks, praying for rescue, often under enemy fire. Still, new volunteers lined up, drawn by adventure, duty, and pride. Many were college kids turned warriors, some barely 20, others veterans of older ships looking for something faster, deadlier, more personal. The PT service became a brotherhood, a mix of reckless courage and relentless teamwork. They painted names on their boats: Thunderbolt, Devil Dog, Shady Lady, each one a floating extension of their spirit. And behind every mission was a thin layer of technical brilliance. Radar operators scanning blips that could mean life or death, gunners keeping the .50 caliber cartridges cooled, mechanics coaxing every ounce of horsepower from the Packard engines. At full throttle, those 3 V12s screamed with over 4,500 combined horsepower, burning nearly 500 gallons of aviation fuel an hour. It was raw power, beautiful, deafening, and deadly. To the Japanese, the PT boats were a nightmare that wouldn't die. They called them devil boats, and rightly so. They appeared without warning, struck with fury, and disappeared before retaliation could even begin. But the truth behind their legend was grittier. For every kill, there were dozens of nights of monotony, rain, and mechanical failure. Still, the crews persisted because they knew one thing: their small victories were slowly grinding down a giant. October 23, 1944. The waters of Leyte Gulf roared with thunder as the largest naval battle in human history unfolded. Amid the monstrous fleets of battleships, cruisers, and carriers, a small force of 39 PT boats slipped through the chaos, tasked with what seemed impossible: scouting Japanese movements and intercepting convoys in the midst of firestorms. As US and Japanese forces clashed in the Philippines, the PTS prowled the narrow straits, their radar screens flickering with ghostly shapes, sometimes friend, sometimes foe. The men were exhausted, but their mission was clear: disrupt everything that moved. That night, PT-490 and PT-491, operating near Surigao Strait, detected destroyers moving north. Their torpedoes struck true. 2 hits, explosions tearing into enemy hulls before the boats darted back into darkness under a hail of shells. It was classic PT warfare: strike fast, vanish faster. But as the Pacific War evolved, their role shifted from lone hunters to vital eyes and ears for the fleet. They rescued downed pilots, delivered commandos, and scouted landing zones long before the Marines came ashore. In the Philippines, PTS ran endless night patrols against supply barges, starving Japanese garrisons cut off from mainland support. The boat's engines screamed across black waves, the smell of gasoline and gunpowder mixing with salt and fear. Each mission carried the same deadly gamble: one misstep, one shell hit, and the sea claimed another crew. Yet morale soared. The men knew they were winning. Allied control of the seas grew, and Japan's shadow empire began to collapse. PT boats even struck deep into harbors, forcing the Japanese to divert resources from major fronts to guard supply routes. A tactical victory few historians truly appreciate. By war's end, more than 700 PT boats had served, racking up hundreds of enemy vessels sunk or crippled, thousands of missions completed, and immeasurable chaos inflicted on enemy logistics. Over 400 were lost to battle, accidents, or storms, a staggering toll for a force of their size. But their impact was undeniable. They proved that speed, ingenuity, and courage could punch far above their weight in modern warfare. After 1945, many boats were decommissioned or burned on beaches. too costly to ship home, too advanced for peacetime navies. But the spirit of the PT men lived on. Their tactics inspired the fast attack craft of the Cold War. Their stories carried through generations of sailors who still whisper about the Mosquito fleet that took on giants and won. The Pacific is calm now, but beneath those waves rest the remains of wooden warriors, engines silent, torpedoes rusted, flags long gone, monuments to a time when bravery raced on gasoline and plywood, and victory rode the roar of Packard V12s in the night. The war ended, but the legend of the PT boats never sank. Their hulls may have burned on forgotten beaches, but their roar still echoes in the engines of every fast attack craft, every special operations boat that prowls the seas today. What they proved was simple, that courage, speed, and ingenuity could change the shape of war. Their missions were never about glory. They were about grit, teamwork, and the belief that even a handful of men in a wooden boat could make a difference against an empire. John F. Kennedy would carry that belief all the way to the White House, his leadership forged in the flames of PT 109. Veterans of the Mosquito fleet went home, became teachers, engineers, fathers, but they never forgot the nights when the ocean turned to fire and they raced into it anyway. The PT boats were the smallest ships in the biggest war, yet they left a wake that still ripples through history. In an age of drones and steel, we remember the men who fought with wood, gasoline, and raw nerve, who turned the dark Pacific into their hunting ground. Their story isn't about machines. It's about men, about what happens when ordinary people are handed impossible missions and still choose to go. And somewhere, out on a quiet sea beneath a Pacific moon, you can almost hear it, the faint growl of 3 Packard engines, the heartbeat of the fearless, fading slowly into history's tide.